Sure. Thank you, David. Delighted to be here. Happy New Year, everyone. As David said, I am a practitioner. Actually, I'm a sort of academic, I suppose. I'm a visiting professor at Loughborough University in infrastructure resilience. I lead national resilience at PA Consulting, so work across government, and last year founded the Centre for Whole Society Resilience. I also recently led the international standard for urban resilience, which came out last month. So I will encourage everybody to kind of get a copy and let me know any of your thoughts and comments on it. But it's kind of puts those guiding principles and a framework together for how we kind of structure and think about urban resilience. So that's been a long time coming and a long time in the works. So pleased to see that that's out. I think from my perspective, I think very broadly about resilience, a very sort of systems-based approach to resilience. And it's sort of really obvious to me that, I think we all saw that we were not prepared for the pandemic. And it's really been a catalyst for us to kind of reckon with ourselves around this kind of, there's always been this tension between, I think, sort of efficiency and resilience. And I think a lot of clients, a lot of sectors tend to pendulum, and countries tend to pendulum between being efficient and being resilient as if it's, one or the other, and not thinking about resilience as a strategic enabler. So I've really seen that start to move in terms of that shifting the dial from reactive to a more proactive stance, which has been really great. And in the UK, we've seen essentially the Cabinet Office split into two functions. So traditionally it had just that response function, so the COBRA function, and then they set up a separate resilience directorate, which is a strategic function. And so I've kind of seen more of that, and I've been advising clients around having that separate strategic function for resilience, where you're getting ahead of it, not running around with your hair on fire. So that's definitely a trend I've been seeing. And then the Resilience Directorate put out a national resilience framework at the end of 2022. So that was obviously on the back of the pandemic. So laying out what they wanted to do over the next 10 years. And that's based on three kind of fundamental sort of requirements, or what's the right word I want, visions. So one is prevention rather than cure, so which was great. So actually thinking more about prevention rather than response. The second was it being a whole society endeavor. So basically everyone has to play the part. It is part of a big system. I always say you can't be resilient in a silo. It's all about that sort of global interdependence. And then the last sort of foundation was a shared understanding of the risks that we face. And so very much about sharing information, data, and us all being, and I think also I would extend that to a shared understanding of resilience as well. And then more recently, so last summer, we had the COVID inquiry, which I know the government are looking to respond to, so the Resilience Directorate are looking to respond to, but they kind of said similar things. They said it needs to, civil contingencies, emergency preparedness needs to be, and resilience needs to be simplified in terms of how it's organised. But they said it does need to be whole system, but you need that single point of kind of the Cabinet Office needs to be the one that's really kind of bringing it all together, to sort of paraphrase. So I often talk about, I suppose, four or five key things that I think are really important for kind of building sort of this national and urban resilience. The first is, we've touched on already, is whole system resilience. So I think better joining up of dots. I think our global kind of interdependencies have mean that we just don't have visibility of the tiers of kind of dependence that we have. And even if we, I'm doing some work with the MOD at the moment on supply chain resilience, which is really, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute with regard to the pandemic. So I think there's that need to really understand those interdependencies, to kind of join up top to bottom. And I always kind of very much do a sort of a system and a value-based approach to resilience. And I think that's really important to sort of link resilience to value and show how it kind of flows through a system, because I think that helps you think about where do I need to kind of target. So that's one thing I think we need to do better at, and joining up those government departments, joining up that end to end. So whether it's research, practice, and policy, which is what we're doing at the Centre for Whole Society Resilience, trying to just pull together that whole network of people that work need to work together, which also includes voluntary sector, government, business, and citizens, and kind of how do we empower everybody and coordinate that to kind of have this sort of total defense, as the Swedes say, or kind of national resilience, as we say. The second point, I think, is really around communicating and embedding resilience. So there's, I think, quite a big piece around how we get people to be interested in resilience. And I don't think shouting to them about all their risks and scaring them all the time is necessarily the right way to do it. So I think we need to think about having a conversation about what resilience means to people and communities, and getting them to really engage in that process. So I think that's going to be quite interesting to see how we can better do that. And then I think embedding that culture of resilience and just that kind of nationally, I think it is quite an interesting problem that we're discussing and looking at the moment. The third one, which I sort of touched on as well, is around, and is my sort of pet subject, is around measuring resilience and valuing resilience. So kind of being able to quantify the benefit of investing in resilience. So a lot of people and a lot of governments are like, well, it might never happen. Why should I bother investing? And so I think that's a bit of a barrier. So I think being able to clearly articulate, yes, but this is your value at risk, and if this happens, this is the impact, and this is what it's going to cost you. And actually, investment upfront is there's clear benefits, and there are other benefits. And I'm currently working with the UK Treasury on supplementary guidance to their Green Book business case for valuing resilience. So that now every government agency that's putting, or anybody that uses the Green Book, can now actually have this extra guidance on this is how you incorporate thinking about resilience and valuing that as part of that business case process, which is really exciting. So I think that's a really key step forward. One of the other kind of key areas is this sort of harnessing data and technology, and that sharing of information. How do we actually enable that in a better way? How do we harness technology for better situational awareness, predictive analytics, modeling? So I think that's a whole kind of big area that we're looking at. I can say a bit more about that later if needed. And then lastly, I think I touched on supply chain resilience. I mentioned we're doing some work with the Ministry of Defence here in the UK at the moment, looking at their sort of supply chain, because recent events, not just the pandemic, but wars and things, really shaken their supply chain. I think during the pandemic, we obviously saw huge disruption. And PA, although I didn't work for them at the time, they during the pandemic, PA led the ventilator challenge, which was essentially we were asked to produce 30,000 ventilators in 8 weeks at the start of the pandemic, which is pretty mental. And so we had to kind of coordinate multiple manufacturers kind of worldwide and in the UK to be able to develop these devices. And it's people that don't normally do that. And so this was a really interesting proposition around how do we utilize our industrial base to actually, during an emergency, to be able to create the things that we need. And so this was a really good, it was amazing. And we did actually do it. And it was being able to draw that network together. And I think so, which was, I think, really, really key, having these networks. And Cambridge University did a study afterwards, actually, about this, and looking at, the lessons we can learn from the ventilator challenge, and thinking about, as we prepare, how do we actually, can we think about this adaptability within the system? How do we adapt how we kind of our supply chains or our industrial base and our manufacturing to be able to help in case of a pandemic? And I think this is really key, and this will be really key for the MOD, thinking about how do they actually, if they had to go to war, how do we actually build up that industrial base and the things that you need? And so I think this adaptability and thinking a little bit laterally about how we actually use what we have to be able to kind of fill those gaps is really key and quite important. I think I'll stop there, David, and let somebody else say something.
Well, thank you, Caroline. Well, you've certainly thrown up enough discussion points.
A few things over there.
We're not going to run out of things to talk about. Thanks for that